Hello, I'm David T. Smith.
Hey, David. How you
Hey,
doing?
Eric. Hey, it's Eric Sandona, and we're
Yeah,
here. We're back. The
we're
podcast is
back.
back. Sips, sips across the sea.
Yeah, it's been a bit dry recently.
Yeah.
So
But we've had a few transatlantic. We've been traveling across the sea. That's why we've not been able to be sipping.
yeah.
So
Though to
yes.
be
So
fair, we did record 2 episodes in person that I have not posted yet. So
well,
so the
there we
don't
go.
I know people are waiting with bated breath, but
So look out for that. Make sure you subscribe so you
yeah.
can find out about Hague. And then the other one was
Benchmark.
Benchmark. Yeah, that was a
That was
good deep
interesting.
dive in benchmark bourbon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but today we're talking about gin in
Mhm.
in um in anticipation of World Gin Day,
Right.
which is coming up. It's the second Saturday in June,
Yeah, the
which
14th?
the 14th. Yeah,
Yeah.
used to be the first Saturday in June, but we wanted to do something. It was a long, long time ago, but there was a plan to do something, and both Emma Stokes and I are on holiday, and it got moved to the second Saturday in June. But I think it's better. And now Emma is
Okay.
completely
So are you the originator of World Gin Day?
no, I'm not the originator of Fortune Day.
Okay, I was gonna
We were just
say,
gonna we were
but
just
it's
gonna do
moved
something.
because of your schedule.
And Emma's schedule. Emma is the. It was started by a guy called Neil. Yet another gin, like right back in the day, and then Emma's taken on the reins. She's the chief operating gin monkey of the whole thing. So it's all her work, nothing to do with me.
Ah,
But there was this one time when I don't think we ever did it in the end, but we were going to do something and we had to move it because she was away and I happened to also be away. So
well, there you
there we
go.
go. That's why it's the second. We're recording this early.
Yeah,
With,
better
um,
than after the fact or the day of, and then it comes out after later. So
yeah, 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 yeah.
we've
Nice. I
actually
mean, for
planned ahead
me,
here.
World Gin Day, I like to celebrate privately.
Not among the masses.
Stay rest. Like Halloween for vampires.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, let everyone else. It is a day, I think, for real broad gin love, and I think that's
Hmm.
great for people to celebrate that. So, but today we're going to look at something in particular with gin, and that is a serve. Now, is it the gin and tonic? Is it the martini? The Negroni?
What is it?
No, tell us, Eric.
Uh, One of my newfound favorites, gin and water.
Yep, not even sparkling water.
No, no,
Still water.
none of those bubbles.
No.
They just get in the way.
So, yeah. So this is, I mean, this idea of taking a spirit or a wine and sort of cutting it with water is very very old. Back to
Yeah,
Romans and before times with wine and things like that.
yeah.
And often, of course, we do sit with whiskey, both with Scotch and with bourbon and American whiskies with the sort of branch waters and just
Yep.
waters and whatever. And that's why you would see in the sort of particularly from the sort of 20s, 30s, 40s, and then a lot more in the 50s and 60s, probably more for at home. A lot of these sort of, and I'm showing one up now, these jugs.
Oh yeah.
They're ceramic jugs. They can be of various sizes, but they typically
I
hold
got a
about a
jug
pint,
here.
maybe, or
Yeah.
pitcher, you might want to call them. Yeah. So Eric's got an old granddad one, and
Yep.
you quite often saw them for whiskey brands. I've got quite a neat sort of
Oh
mug
yeah.
size
I've seen that.
VAT 69 one there. So whiskey, you got whiskey and water, it makes perfect sense. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of gin branded ones, and the one I've got here is Boodle's gin. And I thought, well, what's that? What's that all about? And it's actually because, it was not uncommon to have gin and water. And also, quite often these jugs, possibly slightly larger than a pint one, would often be just on the bar, and you would just help yourself, and the bartender or the landlord, landlady, whomever, would
Yeah.
top the water up. and that was if you wanted a bit of water with your drink, that's what you had. Certainly in the UK, you probably would have had ice, and if there'd been any ice, it had been a little plastic thing, and it'd all be all watery and sort of wouldn't last
Yeah.
for very long. You might get 1 or 2 cubes out of it. So yeah, there's this idea that people can have gin and water. I remember hearing a story about the one of the boardrooms in for one of the old gin distillers. Probably it was Beefeater, probably, but when it was Burroughs, and when they were having gin in the boardroom, pretty much the only thing they ever had was water or maybe some ice, not even gin tonic. It was just sort of
Right.
as straightforward as that. And also, you often do see sometimes when people are evaluating gins and spirits in general, they often cut it with water, and the idea
Right.
being to open up some more of the aromatics and things like that. So that's often like a 50-50 ratio, and obviously for
Right.
drinking it's might be slightly different. I think one of the key things to remember when you're diluting your water, and you're not diluting your water, of course you're not. Cut that out. All right, moving on. One of the key things to remember when you're cutting your gin, you're diluting it, is that the mix of alcohol and water will release heat. It's an exothermic reaction, so you kind of got to watch out for that. You might like that, but you might not.
hmm
Anyway, let's try a gin. I am going to start off with a very standard sort of tumbler here,
Okay.
mine. And what are you? Do I spy a St George?
Yes, I do. Let's see if I can get a little ASMR here. There we go.
Oh, there you
Good
go.
pop. As you might have suspected, a little terroir.
Ah, reminds you of your
That's
boyhood
right.
days, camping with the woodchuck scouts and all
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
I've got uh, Tanqueray, but at 47.3, and it's a little one of these
Oh,
little,
okay. Yeah.
probably
What is
pinched off
this?
an airline.
45. 45 for the. So, in honor of our little venture to gin water, I decided to go with a nice little highball glass here.
The high,
So, one of
yeah,
the things that I remember seeing in lots of old movies is that they would have like a bar on the side. Somebody would walk into the room, the scene would be happening, and somebody would just go help themselves to a drink. And it might be gin, it might be scotch, it might just be some generic whiskey. But usually there was no ice, because it's just sitting on the side of the room. They'd have highball glasses, and they'd have like a soda siphon thing for carbonated water, or they just have still water. And inevitably, somebody would just come along, pour a little gin into a tall glass, and then just add a little water. And that was it. And, watching these movies, I never really thought about it that much. And then later, talking with you, I was like, oh, this was just like, a lot of people weren't just drinking gin or scotch neat. They weren't drinking it on the rocks. A lot of people were just cutting it with water and drinking it like that. And, it wasn't a cocktail, it wasn't a gin and tonic. It was just spirit and water. And that was like, and so I've really started to kind of come around to this, what seems like a fairly old fashioned way of enjoying spirits, but is actually quite enjoyable. So, in honor of that, I went with the highball.
yeah, and the old school, yeah. Yeah, you do. You often see that, the fixing of a drink, and I
Yeah,
guess like if you are drinking in the daytime, and it's if you're drinking neat spirits at 47%,
right.
you might not be much good for the afternoon, but with a bit
Right.
of with some water in there,
hmm
uh, makes it a little bit better. The old sidebar, as it were, the bar at the side, always reminds me, of course, of Gin and Arnold's in The Time Goes By.
Yeah.
They have their tonic water on the sides out and
Yes.
ambient.
Yeah. Which I
Not,
remember you saying, oh, they also have, from time to time, you'll spy a black bottle of Schweppes, which I believe is just the regular club soda.
sparkling water. Yeah, club
Yeah,
soda.
yeah. Yeah, so sometimes they'll have that on the sideboard or bar cart or whatever you might call it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that, but I know you in particular are a fan of very cold gin and
I
tonics.
am. I am.
Very
I am.
cold.
I've made my. I actually had a little carafe with my um, water in, and it's heated up a bit here. So it's my gin and water is not as nice as
Mhm.
it might have been. So I'm going to add a few ice cubes to it.
Yeah,
Um,
put a few ice cubes into my water jug.
yeah, my absolute preference is probably to do that. And actually, I just remembered that I did put some water in the freezer about an hour ago.
Probably
It'll be all
ice.
right. It's in a metal. It's in a metal jug, so it'll be fine.
Okay.
But yes, that would have been ideal.
Yeah.
Because that really really cold water is particularly nice, I think, for this.
Yeah.
Um, but you're still getting a lot of the flavors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, this is Tanqueray. It's four botanicals: juniper, coriander, angelica, and licorice. I'm getting some of the sweetness of the licorice. I'm getting some of the spicy citrus
Yeah.
of the coriander, and I'm getting the um, that sort of resinous of the juniper.
Yeah.
That's probably closer to 40% gin, 60%. So maybe sort of two to one sort of mix.
Yeah.
Um, for smaller serves, you quite
Mm.
often might, certainly again in films, you might see these. Well, I think they're called Paris goblets. Mine's a little bit smudgy actually, but anyway,
Mm.
a little bit dirty. But anyway, regardless, once the drink's in, it'll be fine. And this has got a stem, so it has the plus that it's gonna keep the drink colder. Your hand is not gonna be
Like a mini, what are the
like a
Spanish
wine glass.
tonic? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like a wine glass there.
Yeah.
Um, so we did Tanqueray. It was quite an old gin. We're gonna go right up to date. Show how cool we are
Mm-hmm.
with still gin.
Ooh. Still gin.
Looks a little bit like a golf ball there. Um, this is your latest from Mr. Snoop Dogg. This is
Oh, right. Yeah, I
yeah,
remember seeing the bottle, but I didn't remember who it was from.
and Dre. Sorry, it's Dre and Snoop. Sorry, my apologies
Well, of
to
course.
them. Yeah, it's actually it's 42.5, pretty nice gin on its own. Um, so we'll try that. This has got rose petals in it, and I have a feeling that the
You
water
like
might
rose?
help. I do. So I've got my iced water here. I'm gonna do a little bit longer this time. I'm gonna do it more like 3-1. See how that
Yeah.
kind of comes out. You've not
That's
got a
nice.
nice and clear. Yeah, the citrus is really coming through. The rose does come through, so it just gives it's quite light and elegant. I think even when the water's colder, I miss not having the ice cubes in there.
Yeah.
That sort of center of ice is something that I quite like. Is I think it might have been Dave Wandrich, someone like refers to it as a sort of a battery of coldness for ice in a drink.
Yeah.
I think it's
So
quite
I
that mix in there.
decided to try something a little bit different. I haven't ever done this, so I thought, why not now? Is to try a barrel rested gin and
Aha,
water.
yeah,
So this one's from St. Augustine Distillery in St. Augustine, Florida,
yeah.
which is right on the Atlantic coast. This is actually an aged gin that I rather enjoy. Uh, so I thought, well, let's try it with a little water and see how it.
And is this ex bourbon barrels?
Most likely, yeah, they make a lot of bourbon at their distillery, so probably. So I noticed with the St. George that the water really brought out a lot of the bay leaf and like these really earthy botanicals that they use. The what is it? Spruce tips. Really, a lot of that came
Yep.
out. Not so much citrus, not so much the juniper, but a lot of those like real earthy botanicals. So I'm curious to see what water will do with a barrel rested. Oh, that's really nice. It's got a lot of the lemon comes out. The juniper is definitely there, a little bit resinous, but then there's this really nice light like barrel spice that comes through as well. So in some ways, it's it's not a highball, a whiskey highball by any means, but it reminds me a bit of with like the Japanese highballs, how a lot of them will have like a lemon, like they'll express the lemon oil around the
Yep.
rim of the glass. So because there's so much citrus in this gin, that part really comes through. So anyway, it kind of reminds me of that. But so anyway, that's really nice. That's really nice. I don't know.
Good.
I so when I first started drinking gin, which I might have said up and previously, um, I primarily was drinking it on the rocks. So in a tumbler full of ice with a couple ounces of gin, and it would dilute a little and be very cold, and I really enjoyed that. Um, and drank a lot of Junipero gin that way.
Yeah.
So, but then over years now, I tend to drink it more as like gin and soda or tonic, or maybe make a martini or Negroni, something like that. So I've gotten away a little bit from gin and ice, um, or gin on the rocks. But this, I like this with just the water because it, there's an aspect of it that reminds me a little bit of like, um, with the glass full of ice, to me it comes across a little bit more like a cocktail, and this is just me. I tend to drink those a little quickly,
Ah.
because there's not that much fluid in the glass, right? Because there's so much ice in it.
Yeah. And your
And
cocktail will change as well. So it's kind of like, do you want that melting or not? And
right,
if you don't,
whereas
then you have to drink it quickly.
this is, to me, it's a little bit more like sitting around, drinking a beer, where you're not just like 2-3 sips, you're done with it, right? It's a little bit longer of a process to drink it. And so I don't know. Anyway, I like that aspect. A little bit different pace for the drinking experience. So
Yeah, it's definitely more thoughtful. Kind of how I feel about the martini on the rocks. Part of the reason why I like the martini on the rocks as well, is I feel that is you can take your time with it, and you're not gonna have a spoilt drink.
yeah.
Um, it was one of the first times I really did try gin and water. It was with Plymouth Gin, and
Uh-huh.
they would take you up to, if you're going to visit the distillery. This is on a press trip.
Yeah.
They take you up and see the reservoir where the Dartmoor water, which is what's used for the distillation of Plymouth, they'll make pink gins up there. So gin and Angostura bitters, but and what they had was like a little or like a milk pail on a little chain. It's a typical thing. You drop it down and you can fetch the water out.
Oh, yeah.
And because it's in this reservoir, it was really cold, and that's what we had
Right.
our pink gins with. So that's what I'm gonna have now. So we didn't have any ice. But it was just based on the coldness of the water. So I've got
Mm-hmm.
I keep some pink gin ready and pre-mixed, always ready to go. You
That's
see,
a great idea. Yeah.
and then we'll put some. Here we go. Well, so I've managed to rescue my my metal jug out of the freezer, and there's still some water in it. So I pierced a hole, in the top.
Okay.
So
Well,
we're
that's
going to
good.
see how much of a mess this
Well,
makes.
yeah, that's gonna be ice cold.
There you go.
You know, in
And
the
something
in the
about
right
being cold
light
water.
behind you, the pink really popped. I know you can't see it on the podcast. Yeah,
There you go.
that's that's pink. All right,
Yeah.
and I have to say, you know, with the sort of pre-made pink gin fad that has come and probably gone by now to some degree.
Your strawberry fruity pink gins.
Yeah, the strawberry fruity pink gins, I think really kind of, you know, covered over, hidden this real gem of a drink, the pink gin of which just gin and Angostura and lengthened with water.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really really enjoyable.
That's probably a subject of a talk in its own right, because
Yeah.
there are various ways of doing it, and some people have it more like a martini, and there are different ways. But and actually just adding the Angostura to tonic water as as a pink gin tonic is nice. But
Oh.
this is definitely a very refreshing. And
Mm-hmm.
also the other thing is it's pretty straightforward what you're dealing with here. You
Yeah.
got the gin, you got the water, put a bit of lemon in it, you got a bit of lemon, and that's about it. Like, you're not going to worry about what's the impact of the carbonation. I know so many people these days that are struggling with having too many carbonated drinks with their acid reflux. This sort of
Oh.
unfortunate thing.
Okay.
No, a few people I know, like, they can't have carbonated drinks anymore.
Huh.
So, which is
That's too bad.
yeah, right. Don't look. It's not good at all. Um, and or like, even when it comes to like tonics, there's always the sugar that's in there, or there's
Right.
the artificial sweeteners, and that can cause its various problems. So it's nice to be able to have something, and this is true of having it with whiskey as well,
Right.
that is just pretty straightforward. There's very little in there that's been adulterated or mucked around with, which is pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I started drinking more bourbon and water, or, you know, gin and water, and, you know, just scotch and soda, is because I wanted to kind of start getting away from tonic, partly because of the
Mm.
sugar. I'm like, I don't really need all the extra sugar. You know, I still have it every once in a while, but
Yeah,
it's
there's a
just,
place for it. I mean, a great gin
yeah,
and tonic is hard to beat, but
right.
yeah, just not necessarily having alternatives. I guess
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is the
And that's the
thing.
thing. You start to find alternatives that are, I think, equally as enjoyable. So,
Yeah, but what happens about? It's all well and good us chatting about it here, but what about when you're out in the wild and you ask for a gin and water?
well, we had this experience, luckily enough, and surprising to me, the barkeep was prepared and had a jug waiting behind the bar for somebody to ask for gin and water.
There we
And
go.
it was a branded jug too. I don't remember what brand it was.
I think it was a whiskey brand, and it was probably
Right. Okay.
about half pint
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in size. Yeah, because we had two gins and waters is what we ordered.
Yeah.
Um, and we got two glasses of gins. I think we had ice probably, and then
Yeah.
the jug, and that was the Ship and Shovel, which is by Embankment Tube Station, or very close to Charing Cross. So if you're in that bit of London,
Yeah.
um, check out the Ship and Shovel and have yourself gin and water. I think we had Conker, didn't we? Which is
Yes. Yes, we
a
did.
local Dorset gin, which is
Yeah.
very nice. And yeah, it just worked very well with the water. I think they got some rock samphire in there, which I think gives a little salinity, which is quite fun.
Mm-hmm. See, this is, you know, growing up in such a young country as the U.S. is. Um, I I think this is, to me, this is like one of the benefits of having bars that are so old. Like here, if I went to, well, one, the bars are pretty limited. None of them are that old, maybe 70s at the oldest. And but no, like if you went in and asked for gin and water, they're just like, what do you mean? They give it to you, but they're just like, they would have no concept that this is a thing that people drank, right?
Yeah.
Or this was like kind of a standard order. Forget about Fin Low. We've talked about this previously. Brandy and water. Like, that's not a thing that people really think about anymore. So, that for me, that was a fun little kind of peek at the old bar culture that still
Yeah.
kind of, even in 2025, you can go into an old pub and they'll have a pitcher of water and they can give you a gin water and they're not going to be completely confused.
Yeah, and this is not out in the countryside somewhere. This
Right.
is a stone's throw, depending on how far you can throw a stone. But maybe if you had one of them little whizzy
Yeah,
round
slingshots. Yeah.
slingshot, then I think you could probably hit Trafalgar Square from there.
Yeah, that's right. We weren't that far. Yeah.
It was less than a 5 minute walk from Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a thing about pubs and the pub culture, and more of a place of the pub as a place of community,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just somewhere to get liquored up. I think there's a slight
Right. Yeah.
difference there, maybe. And of course, we didn't have that great experiment that you had.
No. Though I must imagine. I mean, so our experiment started off in many other places of like, maybe we
Prohibition,
should,
just in case you haven't done
yeah,
what we're
we're
talking.
talking about prohibition. Like, temperance was probably needed, right? I mean, like, wrote a whole paper about this in college about how, the average man in the US was probably drinking a fifth of whiskey a week. Like, that's not an insubstantial amount of liquor, right? Now, this is in pure alcohol amount. So realistically, it would have been whiskey, it would have been cider, it would have been beer, it would have been split up about among a
Yeah.
lot of things. But in terms of total alcohol, it was about a fifth of whiskey a week. And that's it's quite a bit to be drinking at one point. So,
Mm.
and this was, a lot of this was happening during the day when people were working. So, so you would, take your morning break and have a pint of beer, and you take your lunch break and you'd have some cider, and
Mm.
and then people wonder why there were so many workplace accidents.
Wow.
So,
What were the options for clean water? Because I mean, that's always been the other thing, isn't it? With alcohol, is it as kind of like, now we live in a fantastic age where you can
right.
just turn the tap, or you and I can. We can just turn the tap, and we've got clean water. But of
Yeah,
course,
so
there was
the
a time when that.
temperance movement in the US was really coming in kind of right at the same time as you were getting um like a sewer system in
Yeah.
Manhattan. So they're figuring out, okay, we need, if we're going to really attack cholera, say, we need to deal with our waste in a better way and keep it away from our drinking water. And
Yep.
so those two things were sort of intersecting. So the water is starting to get cleaner. It's not totally clean, but really the peak of people's drinking is kind of intersecting this point where public works for wastewater management is really starting to come in. And then
So there were starting to be alternatives. I guess that's the thing.
yeah. All sorts of things were happening.
Yeah.
So, but at least in the US, I think people were just, they were drinking a lot. And so the temperance idea of like, maybe we should slow it down, pump the brakes, was a good one. And then it went a little crazy. And then you get the Carrie Nations, and you get those funny photographs of a bunch of dour old ladies saying, like, no man whose lip touch whiskeys will touch ours. And you're just like, okay, lady, I'll take that.
The demon drink. The demon drink. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think some of the things here, there were similar issues where you would have
Because you guys went
body.
through the gin,
Well, the
whatever,
gin thing is kind of
right? The gin craze,
that is questioned. That
right?
is now
But well,
kind of
that
questioned.
narrative, right? We were overdoing it, so we need to pull back. Do you think that had any effect on sort of
I think there was some effect there,
tempering
but
people's
the,
drinking?
the, the gin acts and all that gin craze in
Yeah.
particular is a subject for another
Yeah.
day.
Okay.
Only because there's been some recent
Oh, okay.
uh, research. I'm trying to think what it's called. I think it's called The Noble Water, book by Jared Bowen, Anastasia Miller.
Oh, okay.
Um, well worth checking out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite a new book last year. Really dispels a chunk of what was just accepted history about gin,
Right.
including that. Um, what I've sort of heard in some sort of more anecdotally, to be fair, if we're going down that route, but
Yeah.
is later, more sort of Victorian times, and certainly with some of the religious groups that were not. They weren't necessarily temperance because it wasn't their main thing, but like the Salvation Army, particularly in the UK,
Yeah.
what you would have is you'd have, the man would be there doing his work or whatever, come home at the end of the weekend with his pay packet, which of course being cash, and then he'd go to the pub, and you'd
Right.
have his wife or whomever there trying to get some money off him so that they can have some money for
Right.
the rest of the week. Otherwise,
Right.
it's going to be all sorts of problems because he'd have drunk it all or gambled it all by the end of
Right.
So there was a bit of that, and I think that was part of the reason why, if you wanted to be, particularly in the Salvation Army, because it's kind of where my family has history, you had to sign up to not drink
Mm-hmm.
because of that kind of that issue. It was more about like basically spending the money that would pay for your children's food and
Right.
clothes on booze.
Right. And
And
that's where, in the
not money.
US at least, a lot of these temperance movements came out of movements to basically around domestic violence, of helping protect women and children from their drunken partners and
Yeah,
fathers, and this idea of the man getting paid and then spending all the week's wage on booze rather than feeding his family. So, and that was a thing that was happening in New York and Boston and Chicago and lots of places. And so you had all these largely religious sort of groups, not churches per se, but sort of like the Salvation Army, these like faith-based
yeah,
organization. Anyway,
yeah,
I can't. There's a term for it. I can't remember. So anyway, these sorts of groups start forming up, and they're like, we need to help these people, and so we're going to preach the message about like these guys need to slow down their drinking. We need to help women and children in need, and then that message of slow down your drinking turns into don't drink, and and then that becomes, at least in the U.S., the law of the land for a while. And the and Canada, funny enough, did the same thing, but then they were quickly like, let's they kind of got rid of the they flirted with like outlawing drinking but not production of liquor, whereas we did both.
mm,
And so the Canadians could continue to sell liquor in the US because they
yeah,
realized that there was such a significant like tax revenue source. So they're like, well, who cares if the US or the US citizens are breaking their own laws? We'll still sell them the booze.
yeah.
So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But um, yeah. So anyway,
Right. Well, there we
gin
have.
water, good way to moderate your intake of liquor during the day.
That's the line to end on. Yeah, I was going to ask you because we talked. I think we talked before about um, the Churchillian, haven't we? I think we have.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
whiskey soda. You ever had like a pint glass that's mostly water and then some gin, just like sort of wetting the bottom, just as a
I don't know that I've ever done
very
it with
long.
gin. I've done it. I've definitely done it with whiskey, with both bourbon and with scotch. I don't know.
Yeah,
I can try it out right now.
I'm trying it now.
I got Call to the Past, a little Liberator.
Oh, Liberator, yeah, very good.
Yeah.
I used Plymouth. I think Plymouth, if you've never tried it and you can get hold of Plymouth, Plymouth is a great
Yeah.
gin just to have around anyway. And if you've not had it recently, it's kind of a gin it's worth rediscovering because I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised.
That's good. I mean, I'm a particular fan of Boodles, the jug that you
Yes.
have.
Yep.
Boodles is excellent.
Boodles is, yep. Particularly the stuff you get in the US because it's a little bit stronger. Or at least it was.
Yeah. Okay, so this is very nice. So very dilute, but it's basically water that tastes a little bit like juniper.
Mm.
It's
Yeah, you need to have something that's quite oily that's got a punch to it.
yeah.
Maybe something with a slightly higher ABV just to help it to start with. So I think like Junipero, I think would work really well with that actually. Or the St George's, I could totally see working. What I like on maybe the more closer to equal, not equal ratios with Plymouth is it has that very nice soft mouthfeel anyway, and I think that lends itself very well with still water. But yeah, there you go. Put a little bit of lemon or lime in it as well, and you're away. So this World Gin Day, try gin and water.
Give it a shot. Like it. You might be pleased. Yeah.
Until next time.
There we go. All right. Bye, David. All right.
Cheers, Eric.
Cheers.